Chapter 01, A Song of Ice and Fire, Viserys. No, how could there be nuclear bombs in the hands of rebels from such a third-rate country? I didn't die. Where am I? In a daze, the silver-haired teenager opened his purple eyes, and the scene in front of him gradually became clear. He felt disoriented. Although he didn't know where he was certain it wasn't a hospital. The pale purple walls were slightly worn, and the windows with their peculiar design swayed gently in the breeze. The purple curtains fluttered, giving the room a desolate appearance. The silver-haired teenager realized he was lying on a table surrounded by bottles and jars. The strong smell of alcohol permeated the air. My head hurts, he murmured. For a moment, Viserys felt as if a wire had been shoved into his head and twisted. Judging from his limited experience of partying, this was a hangover. But even for a hangover, this pain was unbearable. Suddenly, a flood of memories began to wash over his brain, making his already pale face look even more frail. Let her go. Ah. Brother, don't hit me, I'm wrong. I'm wrong. Dany. Buy me some more wine. Haha, what Viserys 3, why not call you the Beggar King? How much is this crown worth? Brother, where should we go? Dany. Get up. There's an assassin. Prince, you must protect yourself. Prince Rhaegar is dead. Mother. The Targaryens have no dragons. Memories played out in reverse order before Viserys' eyes, like a revolving door. I am Viserys Targaryen. The two sets of memories overlapped, allowing Viserys to quickly determine his identity. He had gone from being a wandering mercenary to becoming the character in a TV series. He became the third Viserys, obsessed with restoring his country, but rejected everywhere, and finally trying to beg the Horse Lord for troops by betraying his sister. But the Horse Lord had used molten gold to finish him off. The process of memory fusion made his temples throb, and he accidentally knocked over the wine glasses and bottles on the table. Ding-a-ling-a-ling, the clinking of copper and iron bottles and jars on the ground was jarring. Several earthenware jars shattered into pieces. Viserys frowned, propping himself up with his hands as he surveyed the mess around him. Before he could react, a figure in a pale blue dress appeared, frantically picking up the pieces. The material of the dress was good but stained and watermarked, barely covering the girl's calves. The top was tight and clearly no longer fit her properly. She couldn't be called a little beggar, but she was definitely a child who had been neglected. The little girl had the same silver hair and purple eyes as Viserys. Her small arms, bare and covered with bruises, looked as fragile as young onions, stirring a deep sadness in him. This was his sister, Dany, who had been with him since childhood. He recalled her many names: Khaleesi of the Grass Sea, Daenerys Stormborn, Mother of Dragons, Shatterer of Chains, Liberator, Queen of the Undulls and the First Men. But now, she was just a little girl, timid and broken from long-term abuse. Viserys' personality had become twisted with each failed attempt to restore their kingdom, and being rejected everywhere they went. He spent his days drinking and taking out his frustrations on Dany. Now, he despised his own behavior, the weak lashing out at the even weaker. Determined to change, he got up and moved to help Dany clean up. But as soon as he reached out, she quickly held her head in her hands and fell to the ground, trembling. Brother, I'll clean it up right away. Don't hit me, she pleaded. Looking at the small, trembling figure, Viserys, with his renewed sense of self, took a deep breath. You're not a brother, you're not a thing at all. What a lovely little sister you have, and you've made her so miserable, he thought to himself. He gently helped Dany up, her small face buried in his chest, her body shaking as if expecting the worst. A term from his old world, white-haired lowly, popped into his head. He quickly dismissed the thought and cupped her dirty little face in his hands. Dany thought her brother was going to hit her again, so she frowned and closed her eyes tightly. Her delicate features twisted together, and her dirty little face wrinkled like a bun. Her small fists were clenched tightly, and she couldn't stop shaking. You go play by yourself. I'll clean up, came a gentle, comforting voice instead of the terrifying, sleeping dragon's wrath. Viserys rubbed Dany's head and then began tidying up the room himself. Dany, who had been sent away, watched in disbelief as her brother actually cleaned up. She couldn't recall the brother who used to tell her stories every night and teach her both the common tongue and Valyrian. Since leaving the Red Keep, they had led a life of wandering. Even after settling down, her brother's kind shadow seemed to disappear, replaced by an abusive stranger. A year ago, Viserys had sold their mother's crown to throw a lavish party. Since then, he had been a completely different person, drinking and beating her all day long. Now, as she watched him clean, Dany couldn't believe her eyes. Viserys, unaware of Dany's thoughts, knew only that their situation was dire. Sir Willem Darry, their caretaker, had long since passed away. The money they brought from Westeros had been squandered, and even the house they were living in was about to expire. On top of that, Robert Baratheon had been sending assassins to kill them. Fortunately, Viserys had been vigilant and managed to escape with Dany time and again. It took Viserys about 10 minutes to tidy up the room. Cleaning was a basic skill for him, and he quickly organized the messy space. However, this new body was not as strong as his old one. Even after this light chore, a fine layer of sweat had appeared on his back. In theory, the original owner's physical condition should have been good. The Targaryen genes were there, and he had learned swordplay from a young age. Even in exile, he had no shortage of nutrition. But a year of self-indulgence had left his body depleted. Viserys, now calmer, tried to think of a way to break the stalemate. Judging by his and Dany's ages, the story of A Song of Ice and Fire wouldn't begin for another 4 or 5 years. He needed to find a way to survive until then. But this was not easy for a prince who had lost his country and was living in exile. If he could, he would have preferred not to have this identity, avoiding constant assassination attempts. His first thought was to return to his old profession, but his current body was too weak for war. So, the first task was to improve his physical fitness, which required a good diet. The problem was, he had no money. As Viserys pondered how to make money, a blue light screen appeared in front of him. Chapter 02, Add Points, Subtract Points. Viserys Targaryen Health, 62.4 Spirit, 94.9 Constitution, 39.6 Magic, 7.1, Skills, Dragon Dreams, Ordinary plus Skills, Warfare, Ordinary plus Skills, Reconnaissance, Expert plus Firearms, Expert plus Combat, Expert plus Swordsmanship, Ordinary plus Writing, Ordinary plus Skills, Valyrian, Proficient plus Court Etiquette, Proficient plus Common Tongue, Proficient plus Music, Proficient plus, Assignable Points, 0. 1 Assignable General Proficiency Points, 10. Looking at his own panel, Viserys gained a better understanding of his new body. First, Health. It was clear that the scale was out of 100, and at 62.4, he was sub-healthy. Fortunately, there were no diseases, so with proper care, he could reach 70. Then there was Spirit. Viserys was a genius student in the original work, and with the fusion of 2 souls, it was normal for his spirit to be high. As for Constitution, it related to physical fitness. Despite the effects of heavy drinking, he could improve it through exercise. The most intriguing skill to him was Dragon Dreams. Viserys realized that part of the memories he had inherited seemed to belong to the dream world. In the original story, Robert sent many assassins to kill him and his sister, but Viserys had been able to escape with Dany repeatedly, likely due to these prophetic dreams. Apart from Dragon Dreams, the other skills appeared ordinary at first glance. However, a closer look revealed a plus and dash next to each skill, indicating they could be adjusted. The skills also had 4 quality levels, and points and proficiency could be assigned. Let's try it first, Viserys thought. He decided not to touch the Dragon Dreams skill for now, considering its critical role in their survival. Instead, he chose the skill closest to the limit of his level, Combat. He added 6 points of proficiency, and the Combat skill bar flashed silver and turned into Master. Combat, Master plus instantly, Viserys felt all his previous training experiences vividly come to life. His actual combat experience and even the images of combat matches he had watched became part of his strength. If he had been a master at fighting 10 opponents before, now he was a master of hand-to-hand combat. Excited, he stood up and performed a set of combat techniques. These military fighting techniques, though not aesthetically pleasing, were fierce and lethal. Absorbed in his own fighting, Viserys didn't notice Dany, who was pressed against the wall, terrified. Her little body trembled, her face pale. To her, this display seemed like Sleeping Dragon's wrath, amplified. But Viserys quickly ended his performance. The whole process took less than 5 minutes. Viserys was out of breath, and his clothes were soaked with sweat. Before he could even finish half of the martial arts routine, his legs went weak, and he sat down, exhausted. He turned his attention back to the panel. Having just explored the plus sign, he now decided to try the dash sign. After considering various skills, he focused on court etiquette. This skill seemed unnecessary for his current situation. Clicking on court etiquette 100 times in a row, the assignable general proficiency points only increased from 4 to 5. Realizing something, he switched his target to firearms. This time, clicking 10 times increased his general proficiency by 1 point. Finally, he reduced the warfare skill, gaining another point. Viserys now understood the significance of skill levels and the relationship between assignable general proficiency points and skills. High-quality skills could be exchanged for more general proficiency, which could then be allocated to any skill, regardless of quality or level. However, when he looked closely at the diamond-level skill, he noticed the minus sign was gray, indicating it couldn't be reduced easily. Realizing that he and Dany still faced the threat of assassins, he decided to make some strategic adjustments to his skills. For instance, they were currently in Bravos, where everyone spoke Valyrian. Thus, he only needed the common tongue skill to a level where he could understand and speak it. Since there were no firearms in this world, he could temporarily give up that skill. After making these adjustments, Viserys gained 400 points of general proficiency, which he immediately added to his sword skills. Prince, you must pay attention to the key points of swordsmanship and the transmission of power. Prince, treat the sword as an extension of your body. Prince. For a moment, Ser Willem's voice and image appeared vividly before Viserys' eyes. Swordsmanship, proficient plus, master-level combat skills combined with proficient-level swordsmanship, I can feel the power surging, he thought. However, his poor constitution meant his body couldn't fully utilize his newfound skills. Seeing that he still had 0.1 assignable points, he added them to constitution. A warm current spread from his chest to his limbs, and then quickly disappeared. Although it wasn't very noticeable, he felt slightly stronger. Meanwhile, Dany watched her brother, confused. He stared into the air, sometimes thoughtful, sometimes smiling foolishly. Her violet eyes were full of doubt, unable to understand his strange behavior. When Viserys came to his senses, it was already dark. He stepped into the courtyard, where the golden afterglow illuminated the stone slabs beneath his feet. The distant sound of the sea breeze added a sense of tranquility to the evening. He boiled some water, intending to give both himself and Dany a simple scrub. At first, Dany was nervous and scared. Her small, scarred arms were tucked in front of her chest, and she stood stiff and motionless. Normally, when her brother grabbed her head, it meant a beating. But this time, all she felt was a gentle wash. The warm water ran down her hair, mingling with her tears. Little Dany couldn't discern what kind of tears they were, fear or injustice, sadness or happiness. The sobs she tried to hold back were drowned out by the sound of the water, and Viserys didn't hear them. He only knew that Dany had been left neglected for too long, and her hair had a distinct oily smell. Dany was already 8 years old, and for psychological reasons, Viserys only washed her exposed arms and legs. Due to the limited hot water, after giving her a simple wash, the water in the basin was too dirty to use further. Viserys simply wiped the sweat off his body with the water Dany had left over. That night, little Dany rolled out her own bedding and spread it on the floor. Viserys had previously forbidden her from sleeping in the bed, a decision that now filled him with shame. Finally, after more than 3 years, Dany once again slept in her brother's arms and listened to him tell stories. Once upon a time, there was a mountain, and in the mountain, there was a temple. In the temple, there was an old holy sister and a little holy sister. The little holy sister wanted to hear the old holy sister tell a story. What story is it? Once upon a time there was a mountain. Dany sensed something was off with the story, but Viserys' soothing voice lulled her to sleep. That night, she slept more soundly than she had since their days in the house with the red door. As he watched Dany sleep, Viserys began to contemplate their next steps. Bravos, a city comprised of hundreds of islands, was known as the Bastard of Valyria. It was built by slaves who had rebelled against the Valyrian Empire. Bravos was a prosperous commercial hub, home to the famous Iron Bank, and its manufacturing and fishing industries were also quite developed. The city was particularly renowned for its assassins, bodyguards, and sex industry, though Viserys had no intention of considering the latter. He realized that the original body he now inhabited still owed a debt, making Dany a likely target for their creditors. Should he leave Bravos first? With his low constitution, the strain of these thoughts quickly overwhelmed him, and he drifted off to sleep. Beggar King, pay up. Ah. Brother. Brother, save me. No. Let her go. No. Viserys suddenly jolted awake. He had dreamed of a man and several strong accomplices breaking into the house, knocking him down, and kidnapping Dany. This was unmistakably a dragon dream. Based on past experience, what occurred in dragon dreams would become reality within a few minutes. Seeing Dany curled up next to him like a little kitten, he knew he had to act quickly. Chapter 03, Violent Debt Collection. According to the original plot, Viserys did not give up on his sister. The two of them spent several more years wandering until they were found by Illyrio Mopatis, a wealthy merchant of Pentos, who invited them to live in his mansion. Later, Illyrio arranged for Dany to marry the horse lord, Drogo. Following this pattern, the original Viserys would have chosen to stay. Viserys analyzed the situation from his dream. There were 4 intruders, 2 young men of medium height and 1 tall, bald man. The bald man was about the same height as Viserys but much stronger, akin to comparing the strength of a thumb to a pinky. In the dream, the bald man pinned him to the ground as the others took Dany away. Despite this, Viserys didn't want to flee. Leaving the courtyard would mean a return to a life of wandering, with no home and no food. This was unacceptable. Moreover, having foreseen the other party's tactics and being a master of combat, he believed he could handle them. These men were ordinary people, while he had extensive training and experience. Viserys glanced at Dany, who was still sleeping. Quietly, he took his sword from under the bed and left the room. "Be careful, don't hurt the little girl." "Yes, sir." The 3 men responded in unison. As for that Viserys, Hellbow's eyes flashed with murderous intent. "Regis, break his leg." In those days, a broken bone often meant death due to poor medical conditions. Hellbow believed that as long as he didn't kill Viserys on the spot, the people behind him would handle the rest. "Don't worry." The bald man named Guys replied in a deep voice, subconsciously clenching his fists, producing a crunching sound. Hellbow, having given his final instructions, was about to tell his servant to knock on the door. It was still dark, and they planned to take advantage of the situation to catch Viserys off guard. Bang, bang, bang. "Beggar King. Come out. Pay up." The voices of the men grew louder, drawing the attention of curious neighbors who peeked out of their windows and doors. When they first learned their neighbor was a former nobleman from Westeros, there was some talk. But after seeing Viserys' true state, they lost interest. In Braavos, a commercial city, a nobleman without money was despicable. What status could a descendant of a former dynasty have? As people woke up and prepared to watch the spectacle, Dany, who had been sleeping soundly with her face buried in Viserys' side, was awakened. Her purple eyes were full of unease. "Brother. Where is my brother?" Dany looked around but didn't see Viserys. She suddenly felt lost and helpless. She walked out of the room and saw Viserys standing in the courtyard. "Brother." Before she could finish speaking, Viserys turned around and gestured for her to be silent, then motioned for her to go back into the room. Dany nervously retreated and peeked out of the window. "What are you yelling about?" "I'm coming." Viserys pretended to be impatient. Seeing that his plan seemed to be working, Hellbow was pleased. He could easily handle a rundown prince. "Regis, when he opens the door, you hold him down. The rest of you come in with me and grab the little girl." "Yes. Yes." The large, bald-headed guy stood at the door, waiting to pounce as soon as Viserys unlocked it. The others listened carefully to Viserys' footsteps and slowed their breathing. "Beggar King. Open the door." Hellbow pretended to be in a hurry. "What are you yelling about? Is your mother in my bed?" Viserys shouted vulgarly to disorient his opponents, pulling the latch while shifting his weight backward to avoid any possible attack. Viserys' cursing took Hellbow by surprise. This was harsh. Is it really Viserys behind the door? But the voice was right. "Humph. I'll break both your legs and rip your mouth off." Hellbow thought viciously. Regis, standing in front of the door, saw Viserys twitching the latch. He raised his thick arms like a bear, ready to pounce as soon as the door opened. Even the neighbors watching the spectacle knew what was about to happen. They held their breath, and Hellbow's warning look made them even more afraid to make a sound. Crack! As soon as the old, mottled wooden door opened, Regis couldn't wait to slam it shut. Bang! The impact sent the door crashing back into the frame, and Viserys saw only a huge black figure lunging at him. He swiftly sidestepped to the left, avoiding the attack from the bald guys. Then, he landed a precise hook on Guys' chin. The technique, speed, and precision were impeccable, but the punch lacked power. Guys staggered, slightly dizzy but not knocked out. The 3 men outside the door had not yet reacted when Viserys threw 2 more hooks, one to the left and one to the right, knocking them off balance. The last 2 fell because they didn't stand straight. Viserys had the skills of a combat master, but his physical condition was lacking. After a brief moment of dizziness, the 3 men regained their footing and prepared to launch another attack. However, Viserys' sword was already at Hellbow's neck, making them afraid to move. Hellbow was the most frightened. As an experienced thug, he preferred recruiting 13 or 14-year-old boys. Boys that age could be deadly, and he always went for the real thing, a white knife going in and a red knife coming out. Facing such a young man, he was acutely aware of the potential danger. If he couldn't resolve this quickly, he'd be dead by the end of the day. especially since he could smell the faint odor of alcohol on Viserys, indicating unpredictability. Helbo looked at Viserys, whose half-face was obscured by long silver hair, and stuttered, "Calm down. Calm down. Give me the money, and I'll leave. I won't hurt you." The situation had escalated so rapidly that Helbo didn't have time to organize his words. The neighbors watching from outside were equally shocked. They had seen Viserys before. He was tall but still thin, seemingly no match for the men confronting him. Yet, this sudden turn of events was unbelievable. Chapter 04, Working to Pay Off Your Debt. Dany, who was lying on the windowsill, watched the entire confrontation unfold. Seeing her brother, Viserys, display his dragon-like might with his purple eyes shining, she momentarily forgot about the wounds on her arm, wounds inflicted by Viserys not long ago. Under the threat of the sharp blade, Helbo instructed the three men to wait outside the door, leaving him alone with Viserys to negotiate. Prince, we are only here to settle the outstanding payments with you. We really have no other intentions, Helbo said with a servile smile, his gold teeth twinkling and making his words even less credible. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you smell your own farts? Viserys retorted, delivering each word with a staccato slap to Helbo's fat face, humiliating him with every strike. He suspected that the man before him was not a nobleman at all, but a street thug. Dany, watching from behind the window, felt very satisfied. This thug had often appeared when Viserys was drunk, stealing things from their home and looking at her with ill intent, even attempting to touch her. To Helbo's surprise, Viserys began discussing the debt after humiliating him. If Helbo were in control, he would have demanded an unreasonable sum. But now, he had to tread carefully. You owe us 132 gold coins, 26 silver moons, and some change. Viserys glanced at his neck, and Helbo quickly revised his statement. 130 gold coins. You give us 130 gold coins, and we'll call it even. Viserys couldn't even come up with 3 gold coins, let alone 130. Actually, it's all negotiable. We can give you a discount on the rest of the debt. Or 125. Viserys remained silent, and Helbo, increasingly desperate, continued to haggle with himself. It can't be less than 120. I can't give you a lower price. Viserys still didn't respond. 120. I'll find a way to get you the rest. 120. What do you think? Viserys still didn't say anything. It really can't be less, Prince. Would you like to name a price? Helbo said, his respectful tone barely masking his desperation. Viserys smacked his lips and then looked Helbo in the eye. I don't have a single gold coin right now. Helbo's expression froze. But I have other repayment options. Other. Helbo's eyes shifted toward the house. Sensing his gaze, Dany gasped and quickly hid under the window. Watch your eyes, or I'll pluck them out. Viserys threatened coldly, his expression full of menace, as if he might bite Helbo's throat at any moment. Helbo shivered and quickly apologized, I didn't mean it that way. I thought you were talking about the house. You said that. Ignoring his flawed reasoning, Viserys asked, let me ask you a question first. If you receive 130 gold coins from me this time, how much will you get? Helbo, though he had a hunch about Viserys' intention, answered honestly, well, I can get about 40. The debt collection industry is indeed highly profitable. Viserys' eyes lit up. This figure aligned with what he knew from his previous life. Depending on the difficulty of the collection, the debt collector might receive half or even more of the total amount owed. Some creditors were only interested in recouping a fraction or causing trouble for their debtors. If he joined the industry, he could quickly earn enough to take care of his health and Dany. After recovering, he would join the mercenaries, maximizing his talents. Viserys said, Braavos is a big city. I'm sure I'm not the only one who owes money, right? Helbo was cautious, what you mean is. Yes, that's what I meant. Helbo lowered his head, reaching for his beard before thinking better of it and touching his face instead. He had not come here for gold but for Dany. He had assumed Viserys was an easy target but realized he was wrong. The original plan had to be abandoned, making it difficult to explain to his employer. Seeing his hesitation, Viserys added, selling people in Braavos, I think it's 10 years of hard labor, right? He pinched Helbo's neck, still smiling, but the gesture was menacing. Helbo felt his soul being squeezed. He had made all the preparations, yet here he was, the passive party. The reward for capturing Dany was 200 gold dragons, but now that money seemed too risky. Viserys' proposal had merit. Compared to ordinary teenagers, Viserys dared to fight and had martial arts skills. If he joined Helbo's team, it could be beneficial. Helbo had several businesses lined up. Yes. I accept your offer. In a few days, I'll come to see you. How about we go together to help people who need to pay off their debts? Helbo suggested with a smile. No problem. Then you can lend me some money first, and I'll deduct it from my salary, I mean, my compensation. Helbo swallowed hard, feeling suffocated. When had he become a debt collector who not only couldn't collect money but also had to leave some behind? Okay. He took a heavy purse from his bosom and handed it to Viserys. Well, thank you. From now on, I'll call you Sir. No, you don't have to. Helbo bowed slightly and turned to leave. Seeing a crowd of onlookers gathered outside, his face fell. Today's business trip was a failure, severely damaging his reputation. He put on a fierce look, trying to regain some dignity. But he had not taken 2 steps when Viserys stopped him. Wait. Helbo felt a bitter taste in his mouth and quickly squeezed out another smile, the rapid changes in expression causing his facial muscles to twitch slightly. Is there anything else, Prince? Viserys pointed to the broken door and said, the door is worth 2 gold coins. Take it out of there. Dany was overjoyed. Every time Helbo came, he always took something away. But this time, not only did he leave empty-handed, he also left a significant amount of money. The money would be enough for the 2 siblings to live on for a long time, assuming her brother Viserys didn't drink it all away. Suddenly, a distant roar echoed through the air. It was the Titan of Braavos, the colossal statue that signaled the start of the city's day. The people of Braavos began their work with the roar of the Titan. Let's go. Let's get something to eat, Viserys said. Okay, Dany followed cheerfully. Unlike the little girl's excitement, Viserys knew that their troubles were far from over. He remembered that the men who had lent him the money seemed to be a shipowner with 3 or 5 ships under his command. In those days, good sailors were hard to come by, and any shipowner capable of managing them was naturally formidable. If the shipowner couldn't get Dany, he might try something else. Helbo had proven useless, so the shipowner would probably find someone more competent. The 2 of them were already at each other's throats. Chapter 05, Dance of Water. According to Viserys' judgment, Braavos might have once been a massive meteor crater. Its outer perimeter consists of a series of long, narrow mountain islands, resembling protective walls encircling the City of 1,000 Islands. Not long after leaving the house, Viserys could see the statue of the Titan of Braavos, which had just roared. This nearly 300-meter-tall statue is one of the 9 wonders of the world. Every corner of Braavos offers a view of this magnificent statue. It may have been carved into the mountain, but it could also be magic. Viserys mused. After all, magic existed in this world, and it was present in his own panel, so the assumption was not far-fetched. Dangler lived in the wealthy district. Early in the morning, water vendors delivered sweet water to the area. To access this sweet water, the Braavosi built a waterway running through the city, called the Long Waterway. Wealthy families who lived farther from the Long Canal relied on water vendors to pull the water and sell it. To fetch a good price, these vendors dressed very cleanly. When Viserys and Dany first left home, their somewhat shabby clothes didn't stand out. But compared to the well-dressed people around them, their attire was conspicuous. Viserys resolved to buy Dany a clean, well-fitting dress once he had some money left after paying off the gold coin Helbo had left him. As for himself, he would have to make do for now. Following his memory, Viserys led Dany to the house of Dangler. It was a house with a courtyard, almost a mansion. As they arrived, a servant of the Dangler family was running out to buy water. Upon seeing the Viserys siblings, he instinctively tried to drive them away. But recognizing their silver hair, he sneered, "When will you pay me back, Beggar King?" His voice carried, attracting the attention of passers-by who turned to look. In Braavos, it was a great shame to be in debt, and this was a wealthy area where many had heard of the Beggar King. He's the Beggar King. Look at his clothes, he really is a beggar. Hey, he's even got a little beggar with him. Feeling the stares of the crowd, Dany hid behind Viserys' back. Viserys glanced at the people still talking and, with a cold gaze, made them choose to shut up. Now. Viserys called out, pulling out his money bag and making a clattering sound with the coins inside. The metal coins produced a beautiful chime as they bounced around in the silk purse. The servant reached out to take it, but Viserys quickly dodged. "Tell your master to come out with my debt note, and we'll be even." Dangler, with his extensive experience as a sailor, appeared. He had lost an ear on a ship in his early years, leaving an unpleasant black hole on his left cheek. He couldn't fathom how Viserys had managed to gather the money. According to his plan, Dany should have been captured by Hellbow and taken to his ship. But now, he saw the brother and sister standing before him, unharmed. Viserys had a long sword on his back and was looking at him with cold eyes. This kid, he's different, Dangler thought to himself, narrowing his brown eyes. Viserys, once a spirit on the verge of collapse, had been tricked into owing a large sum of money. But now, he was like a blade unsheathed, exuding a chilling presence. Count it. 135, Viserys said, tossing the money bag to Dangler. Dangler didn't bother counting the coins, he simply weighed the bag in his hand, then took out Viserys' debt note. Viserys crumpled the note and gave Dangler a meaningful look. Now we are even. Whatever misfortune befalls you in the future has nothing to do with me. Hearing this, Dangler's heart sank. Viserys knew he couldn't appear weak. A proper display of intimidation might actually buy him more time. As the siblings left, Dangler turned to his servant and ordered, "Go ask that Hellbow guy what the hell he's doing." His face darkened. He wasn't just a small shipowner trying to get Dany, he was merely the white glove of a much larger and more powerful man. Black-belly fish. Fresh black-belly fish. Onions, just in from the mainland. After leaving Dangler's, the siblings headed to the market. Unlike the wealthy district, the roads here were riddled with puddles and hidden mines underfoot. The two walked through the market, with Dany trailing behind Viserys like a duckling after its mother. Braavos, a sprawling city, was divided into 7 or 8 smaller towns. Viserys and Dany lived in Bitterwell Town, aptly named for its poor-quality drinking water but cheaper vegetables. The staple food for the common people in Braavos was fish, and vegetables were a rare commodity. Viserys had previously avoided places like this market. But now, this place, devoid of industrial civilization, felt novel to him. Although he used to be a commoner who often begged for money, his targets were usually the upper class of Braavos. Among the common people, he wasn't well known. Additionally, while Braavos had its own descendants of Valyria, white hair and purple eyes were rare but not sensational. His handsome face, however, still brought him some advantages. "Hey, sister, how much is this fish?" Viserys asked, a smile on his lips, his good looks evident. The female stall owner, wearing a dark green vest, blushed slightly. 5. I mean 3 iron coins for one. 3 coins, a reasonable price. Okay, please pick me out a few. Okay, the stall owner's voice softened, almost like a whisper. Somehow, the fish today were particularly slippery, and the woman was a little flustered. Even so, she picked out the fattest sea fish for Viserys. Under the guise of handing the fish to Dany, she slipped a few extra oysters into the bundle. As the brother and sister left, the woman felt a surprising sense of loss, so much so that she didn't hear her customers calling out to her. "Boss. Are you still open for business?" A grumble pulled her back to reality, and her previously cheerful expression turned sour. "What are you yelling about? Pick what you want." After leaving the market, Viserys bought 2 more daggers. With these, his close combat killing power would reach a new level. Additionally, he anticipated needing more tools next time, so he found some elastic rope at the market and planned to make 2 simple crossbows. He then bought Dany a linen dress. Although the material and color were not as fine as her blue dress, it was clean, suitable, and Dany liked it very much. Just as the siblings were about to leave, a commotion arose around the market. "There's a duel between 2 swordsmen in the square." A boy in a yellow long-sleeved shirt shouted as he ran, drawing everyone's attention. Instantly, many people paused their activities. Idle chatter ceased, leisurely strollers stopped, and even young lovers were momentarily distracted. "Let's go, wait for me. Hurry up." This time it's Kells, the swordsman under Lady Leda. He's a master of the water dance. Dance of the water. Isn't that the famous skill of the little wolf girl Arya Stark? Chapter 06, Automatic System. As news of the duel spread, the market didn't empty out entirely, but it grew much quieter. Dany's eyes sparkled with excitement, clearly wanting to go. Ordinarily, Viserys would have forbidden her from running around, but seeing her eagerness, he relented. "Let's go. Let's take a look," Viserys said, putting the water jar in a relatively hidden spot. He took Dany's hand and they hurried toward the square. Dany's face flushed with excitement as she tried to keep up with Viserys' pace. Viserys was very interested in the so-called water dance. Arya Stark, Ned's daughter, had learned the water dance from a Braavosi swordsman in King's Landing, and she used this skill to kill the Night King. These techniques were truly remarkable. Realizing Dany's short legs couldn't keep up, Viserys picked her up under his arm and strode toward the square with long steps. They arrived just as the two swordsmen were in the middle of a fierce battle. "Dany, come." Before she could react, Dany found herself on Viserys' shoulders. At first, she felt a bit embarrassed but quickly settled, feeling this was better than when she was little. Perhaps it was a compensation from the seven gods. Dany soon focused on the two swordsmen. To Viserys, the water dance technique resembled the fencing competitions he had seen. The two swordsmen appeared to be around 20 years old, standing sideways and fighting on a single line. One wore a light yellow shirt, the other a dark red one. They moved swiftly and gracefully, like deer in the mountains or squirrels on tree branches. The light from their swords flashed, drawing cheers from the crowd. Despite the elegance, the fight was brutal. The man in the yellow shirt had several wounds, with bright red blood soaking his clothes, making him look miserable. The scene scared Dany, who nervously grabbed Viserys' shoulder. Viserys, however, was fully engrossed in the duel. He observed that the water dance swords were very narrow, aimed at speed. Though not as thin as fencing swords, they were only about 2 fingers wide, likely ineffective against armor. Still, the swordsmanship had merits, especially in footwork. Unlike the stability-focused swordplay of Westeros, the water dancers prioritized agility. Viserys decided that if given the chance, he would learn this technique, and teach it to Dany too. In their current situation, acquiring more skills could only help. Predicting the duel's outcome, Viserys noted that despite the yellow-shirt swordsman's injuries, they were superficial. The maroon-shirt swordsman, though appearing fine, was in worse condition. His steps were already disorganized, his deeper injuries masked by the color of his clothes. As their bloodied clothing soaked, Viserys saw that Dany seemed scared. "Let's go," he said, taking her away. "Yes," Dany nodded, relieved. Dany was very happy. To her, Viserys was becoming more and more human. Not only had he stopped abusing her, but he also carried her around to watch duels, and now, he even cooked for her. The sweet, braised fish melted in her mouth. The joy brought by a satisfying meal was incomparable. Soon, the two siblings had eaten their fill. Dany tried to help with the dishes, but Viserys stopped her. "We just finished eating. Let's talk about it later." Dany nodded and sat down next to Viserys. She felt that her brother had changed a lot, but she couldn't figure out why. Her little brain worked hard to understand. She inched closer to Viserys, and when he didn't object, she rested her head on his lap. Viserys opened his arms and let her rest, soon hearing the light sound of her snoring. He opened his panel to see if he could improve his skills. As he did, he noticed something strange. "I remember that firearms became an entry-level skill yesterday, but now it's an ordinary skill." Viserys had reduced his firearms skills to entry-level plus, but now it had become ordinary plus. He looked at his skills in court etiquette and common language, and sure enough, they had both increased by dozens of points. The other skills that had not been deducted remained unchanged. Despite the oddity, Viserys was excited. This meant something significant. If he learned more skills and mastered them to a certain extent, he would gain a steady stream of proficiency points. He checked the assignable points again and found they had increased from 4 to 17. I've gained 13 points. He saw that the assignable points had now become 0.1, seeming to refresh every day. Assignable points seem to increase by 0.1 daily, and proficiency points fluctuate, he mused. He had only been in this world for less than a day, so there were too few samples to draw concrete conclusions. However, Viserys realized his system was more powerful than he had initially estimated. For now, upgrading his swordplay and combat skills would take time. Therefore, he needed to start making crossbows as soon as possible. He glanced at the gutted fish on the ground. The merchant had told him that the fish contained paralytic toxins and needed to be cleaned thoroughly before eating. After carrying the already asleep Dany back to bed, Viserys began working on the crossbow. In addition to the crossbow, he also wanted to set up some warning mechanisms. As he looked at the wooden doors and the wall, an idea began to form in his mind. Dangler had experienced a string of bad luck over the past 2 years. He once commanded 5 ships, but 4 had sunk, and the 5th was still missing. Now, he was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. At this desperate moment, a Braavos nobleman from the upper reaches of the Long Canal approached him. This nobleman, of course, didn't show his face but sent a servant to offer Dangler a hefty sum of 1,000 gold dragons to acquire Dany, the princess of the Fallen Kingdom. The nobleman chose Dangler because, even before he became wealthy, Dangler had been a hooligan with a lot of experience in shady dealings. He was a qualified white glove, capable of handling delicate and dirty work. So, when Helbo failed, Dangler immediately sought help from another group. He turned to Bannergar from the Fierce Fish Company. The Fierce Fish Company was notorious among the lower classes of bravos, implicated in more than a dozen murders. To this day, no fewer than 20 members were fugitives, each with at least one murder to their name. Take Bannergar, for example. In his early years, he had been involved in a gang war and had his left cheek slashed off. Due to limited medical care, it couldn't be stitched up, leaving his left teeth exposed. He looked like a zombie from a movie, his face grotesque and menacing even without making facial expressions. When he smiled, he looked ready to bite someone's neck off. I don't care what method you use. After the job is done, 300 gold dragons. Dangler demanded. Bannergar sneered, Heh, I've seen that little bitch from the Fallen Kingdom. Even without her status, she's worth 500 gold dragons just for her face. Do you think I'm stupid? As he spoke, Bannergar twisted his neck, deliberately showing Dangler his yellow, mottled teeth. But Dangler was no saint either. This is Bravos. Do you know how much it would cost to settle this just because she is a fallen princess? Dangler countered. Bannergar was unmoved. He took a sip of wine and stood up, then find someone else. He pretended to leave, testing Dangler's resolve. 1 step, 2 steps, and Bannergar was about to leave. It was only about 10 steps from Dangler's desk to the door. Dangler finally caved, name a number. Bannergar smiled and turned around, his relatively intact right cheek submerged in darkness, while the light from outside shone on his broken left cheek, making him look like a ferocious fish with its teeth bared and claws outstretched. 500 gold dragons, plus 20% of the last ship you own, Bannergar demanded. Dangler knew that Bannergar was also trying to clean up his act and planned to buy some property. Done. Dangler agreed. Chapter 07, Violent Debt Collection 2, Raise your hand higher. Shoot it at me. Viserys instructed. Dany held the crossbow that Viserys had made for her, her small, thin arms trembling as she fired it. Whoosh. The arrow flew, but Viserys barely had to move to avoid it. He simply stood there, and the arrow didn't even come close. Why are you closing your eyes again? If you keep doing that, you'll have to do extra training at night. Viserys scolded. Dany pouted, feeling a bit aggrieved. Why is Viserys so strict again? Since he made the crossbows, he had been making her practice every day. Her arms were sore, and her delicate hands had blisters. It wasn't until Viserys sewed her a simple pair of gloves that the problem was alleviated. In truth, Dany couldn't be blamed. She wasn't yet the mother of dragons she would become. She was just a shy little girl, and Viserys, with habits from his previous life, sometimes let his tone become harsh or irritable without realizing it. This made her think the old, cruel Viserys had returned, which scared her. Seeing her expression, Viserys knew he had pushed her too hard. He desperately hoped that Dany would be able to protect herself to some extent, but she was only a little girl under 8 years old. Not every child was as ruthless as Arya Stark, who was brave enough to kill at a young age. Judging by the future performances of Dany and Arya, Dany would focus her talents on politics, while Arya would excel in martial arts. Viserys went over to Dany and rearranged her hair, which was damp with sweat and sticking to her forehead. Take a break, he said, taking the crossbow from her hands. But she pulled back and shook her head. No, brother, I'm not tired. She retrieved another wooden arrow from her waist bag and expertly loaded it. Okay, this time we'll change the target to that wine jar. Viserys positioned himself behind Dany, taking her hand holding the crossbow and pointing it at the wine jar 20 paces away. When shooting, you must look at the target, not the crossbow, and definitely not close your eyes. Viserys' patient teaching calmed Dany's nerves. You have to look at your target and imagine the crossbow in your hand as part of your body. Nothing will escape your eyes. Fire. Dany pulled the trigger, and the clay wine jar was pierced with a dark hole. I hit it, she exclaimed, turning to Viserys with her violet eyes sparkling with excitement. Good, practice more and get the feel for it. MMM. Dany nodded vigorously and took out another crossbow bolt. In just over half a month since Helbo and his gang last paid a visit, the siblings' self-defense skills had improved considerably. Dany, for instance, could hit a target within 10 paces 5 or 6 times out of 10, and within 5 paces almost every time. She was no longer the helpless lamb she had once been. Viserys, meanwhile, had focused on improving his constitution over the past 10 days. He had already increased his physical strength to nearly 45 points. The main reason for this improvement was that he had stopped drinking, allowing his body to recover naturally. Any further gains would have to come gradually, but he estimated that with half a year, he could raise his constitution to around 60 points. This would be the level of an adult strongman, capable of serving as a heavy infantryman or heavy cavalryman in the army. With a year of training, reaching 80 points seemed attainable, equating to the level of an ordinary general. Factoring in the system, which could provide 36 attribute points per year, he could undoubtedly grow into a first-class general. The sellsword scattered across the continent would be a paradise for him to excel in. Additionally, some of his skills had recovered significantly. His firearms skills had returned to the proficient level, and he had made progress in other areas as well. However, he still had a long way to go before advancing from proficient to expert in swordsmanship. During these 10 days, Viserys had noticed several unfamiliar faces around his house. These individuals thought they were being discreet, but to a skilled scout, they were glaringly obvious. By following their trails, Viserys had managed to get close to their lair at night and discovered their origins. If his physical fitness were even half as good as it had once been, he was confident he could track them down completely. He estimated that the group would make their move within the next 2 days, which was why he had been so insistent on Dany practicing with the crossbow. In Bravos, items like bows and arrows were controlled, but a sharpened wooden stick could be just as effective. The gang would never come after him in armor, so a sharpened stick would be enough to pierce human skin. Fierce Fish Company. Let's see how fierce you really are, he muttered. Raising his hand, he shot, skewering 2 leaves and nailing them to the door. Bannergar took Viserys' business very seriously. This was his chance to rise from the ranks of the landless riffraff to the merchant class and improve his social status. In Bravos, merchants were a respected profession, considered the backbone of the city. They even had a better chance of being elected as the Sea Lord, the supreme ruler of Bravos, than the average citizen. The requirements for becoming a merchant were very strict. First of all, one needed to own property. In Bravos, the sale of property required a guarantor, and no one would guarantee a man with Bannergar's background and criminal record. He had finally managed to get a guarantee from Dangler, so he wasn't about to let this opportunity slip away. This time, he was going all out. He learned from Helbo that Viserys was particularly good at melee combat. So, Bannergar hired a master water dancer at a high price. In addition, he brought 5 of his men, each armed with a wooden spear. Tonight, they were here for Viserys' life. Engis, let's get ready to move. Engis was the sword dancer he had hired. Engis, in his early 30s, had a scar on his left eyebrow and yellow eyes, one big and one small, suggesting a past injury in battle. He had fled Bravos after mistakenly killing someone but was found by Bannergar, who promised him a generous reward for this job. Engis replied briefly. After this deal, he would take the murder charge, leaving Bannergar worry-free. In addition to him, Bannergar had also paid off the guards in the area to make their ears less sensitive, ensuring absolute certainty in his plan. After confirming everything with Engis, Bannergar gave his men some final instructions. Leaving 1 man on guard, the group slipped into the darkness, heading for Viserys' quarters. At that moment, Viserys suddenly opened his eyes. He had just woken up from a dragon dream in which he had been attacked. Dany. Dany. Wake up, he called. Groggy, Dany heard Viserys' call. Stay in the room and hide. Do you understand? Dany, still confused, took the crossbow. She saw Viserys put 2 crossbows on his waist, then pick up his sword and quietly approach the front door. Chapter 08, Midnight Bloodshed. Viserys used wine bottles and jars to create makeshift alarm mechanisms. Whether Bannergar and his men tried to climb over the wall or sneak in through the door, they would be detected. Hiding in the shadows of the corner of the wall, he waited quietly, listening intently for any sound outside. Soon, he heard a rustling noise at the door. Before he could figure out what the men were up to, there was a loud crash. The door fell straight from its frame, hitting the ground with a thud and sending up a shower of leaves and dust. They had actually broken down his door. Several men armed with wooden spears burst in, quickly taking over the yard. Some even carried torches. This was what it meant to have a weapon in hand. Just as they were about to break into the room, 2 loud sounds echoed through the yard. A man with a torch and another with a wooden spear let out muffled groans. They turned to see where the crossbow bolts had come from. There stood a young man with silver hair by the wall. Bannergar recognized him immediately and shouted, "Kill him." The 2 men who had been shot didn't even have time to realize where they were wounded before collapsing. Their feet seemed to melt beneath them, and they could hardly stand. Time was running out. Viserys didn't have time to reload both crossbows, so he threw the one in his hand at the man closest to him. He then took the opportunity to reload the other crossbow and fired, killing another man. "He's out of arrows." Get him. Bannergar, the first to react, picked up the fallen torch and shouted. At this point, Bannergar stood with two others, a swordsman and a spearman. He had thought this attack foolproof but didn't expect to lose half his men so quickly. Bannergar looked at Viserys, his exposed fangs gleaming in the torchlight, making him look like a ghost crawling out of hell. He licked his lips menacingly. Viserys and the swordsman simultaneously drew their swords and faced off. This guy's got some skill, Viserys thought as he sized up his opponent. The next moment, the swordsman Aengus attacked, his speed incredible, the sound of his sword slicing through the air sharp and menacing. Viserys quickly felt the pressure. Aengus's swordsmanship was clearly superior. Worse, the spearman beside him harassed him intermittently, adding to his frustration. Desperate, Viserys drew back, pulled the dagger from his waist, and hurled it at the spearman. A sound like fabric tearing filled the air as the dagger found its mark, piercing the minion's body. But Aengus seized the opportunity and lunged at Viserys. Despite his best efforts to evade, a gash 5 or 6 inches long was carved into his side. Viserys threw his dagger again, but Aengus easily dodged it. Bannergar, holding a torch, was shocked. He had prepared meticulously, yet this kid had managed to survive. This couldn't continue. Though Aengus had the upper hand, Bannergar decided to intervene. He threw the torch aside, picked up a wooden spear, and circled around to Viserys' back. Viserys knew Bannergar's intentions but was too preoccupied with Aengus to react. Soon, Bannergar saw his chance and thrust the spear at Viserys' lower back. Despite being outmatched in swordsmanship, Viserys' close combat skills were masterful. His vigilance and reflexes were top-notch. He grabbed the spear before it pierced his skin, preventing further injury. Aengus took advantage of the moment and swung his sword. Viserys blocked it with his own, holding the spear in his left hand and parrying with his right. Aengus's face contorted in a grimace of exertion and excitement at the thought of killing a prince, his brown eyes full of cruelty like a hyena. Bannergar growled and pushed harder with the spear, but Viserys felt his grip weakening. He knew he couldn't hold on much longer, maybe 3 seconds, 5 at most, before he would be overpowered. Suddenly, Bannergar's body shook, and his strength deflated like a punctured balloon. Sensing the change, Viserys pulled and twisted, yanking the spear from his body and thrusting it forward. Bannergar, unable to control his momentum, drove the spear into Aengus. Aengus, caught off guard, had his center of gravity on his sword. It was too late to evade. The wooden spear pierced his abdomen, and Viserys seized the moment to slash Aengus's throat. Aengus dropped his sword, a wheezing sound escaping his lips as he clawed at his neck, choking on his own blood. The sudden reversal was all due to Bannergar's inexplicable loss of strength. Viserys turned and saw Dany standing there, crossbow in hand, ready to shoot. Good. It was worth practicing. Viserys thought, grateful he had made the right decision to save him and his sister. Dany dropped the crossbow and quickly ran to Viserys' side. "Brother, you're hurt." "It's nothing. Just a superficial wound." Viserys reassured her. He knew that if a wound felt hot, it was usually superficial. Only if he felt weak after being injured was it truly dangerous. Although the 2 wounds on his body hurt, they were not fatal. As long as he kept them clean and prevented infection, he would be fine. He was lucky that Bannergar, perhaps fearing he might injure his own men in the dark, had not smeared his weapons with strange substances. But Viserys felt no gratitude for that. During his scouting, he had learned that Bannergar had 2 sons, both in their late teens. Bannergar planned for one son to continue his underworld business while the other inherited the legitimate businesses. Viserys knew he couldn't kill everyone, it would complicate the court's decisions. But Bannergar's 2 sons had to be eliminated. Otherwise, the entire Fierce Fish Company would retaliate against him under their leadership, with endless consequences. Besides, a young man defending his sister against intruders was already a remarkable feat. No one would expect him to take the fight to the man's home. Not only would they not think of it, but they also wouldn't believe it. If he didn't see such a good opportunity, he would be a fool. He tied up the unconscious men and instructed Dany to shoot them if they woke up, forbidding her from communicating with them in any way. Meanwhile, Viserys slipped into the night with his crossbow and dagger. Chapter 09, Night of Blood and Fire. As an island city, Braavos was teeming with seagulls. Viserys disposed of the lookout without a second thought and tossed the body into the sea. Following his predetermined route to Bannergar's lair, he climbed to a high point and surveyed the surroundings. To the northeast, near the Long Channel, the lights were bright. This area housed the Sea Lord's palace, several magnificent temples, and the great theater known as the Gate. The upper reaches of the Long Channel could be considered the center of Braavos. He then turned his gaze towards the northwest, where the Titan of Braavos stood. This iconic structure served as both the city's beacon and its first line of defense, housing an arsenal. Viserys noticed the lights there seemed unusually bright, which was advantageous. If something happened elsewhere, it would be less likely to be noticed. After confirming his direction, Viserys continued on his way. At Bannergar's mansion, Carmen, did you hear the screams? This little bitch is hot. Why don't you go try her out? The young man speaking had a lewd smile, clearly relishing the thought. He was Bannergar's eldest son, Caperson. The two men looked remarkably similar. Caperson's puffy eyes betrayed that he was overtaxing his body. Not interested. Isn't father going to take on the Beggar King? His sister is the princess of a fallen kingdom. I'll save my appetite for that. Compared to his brother, Carmen was slightly plumper, and the two brothers did not look much alike. But the obscene expression and mannerisms were identical. Hey, you're dreaming. That fallen bitch is a big shot in Bravos, and she's from one of the 3 great houses. If she's not a virgin, she's worthless. Caperson took a sip of wine and continued, you'd better keep your pants on and not ruin father's business. Hearing this, Carmen put down his wine glass with some disappointment. Humph. Damn it, what's so great about these big shots? They just have better women than we do. He unbuttoned his shirt and walked into the back room. Hey, don't go too far. You have to give her back to old Pigskin tomorrow. Oh, I know. Carmen waved impatiently. Caperson walked to the window, his sparse chest hair exposed, and enjoyed the sea breeze while drinking. But after a while, he didn't hear any sound from the back room. What's this guy up to now? He wondered, but shrugged it off and continued enjoying the night view. The triennial 10-day festival is about to begin. I wonder if I'll have the chance to meet Lady Phalia, the Moonshadow. Caperson squinted towards the Titan of Bravos. Every 3 years, Bravos held the Masked Festival. On the last day of the festival, people removed their masks to the roar of the Titan of Bravos. The festival included 3 competitions, a sword-fighting competition, a music competition, and the highly anticipated beauty pageant. The prizes for each competition were generous. Caperson reminisced about his previous participation in the festival, lost in fantasy. However, after a long time, he still didn't hear the poor girl's screams, which struck him as odd. Carmen. Carmen. Suddenly, Caperson felt a chill in his throat, his hair stood on end, and his scalp felt as if it were about to burst. What do you want? Hand over all the money. The voice was cold and gloomy, and Caperson did not dare to think otherwise. Okay, I'll get it. I'll get it. He quickly went to the corner of the room, lifted a hidden floor panel, and revealed various deeds and shiny coins. The money is all. Before Caperson could finish his sentence, he felt a cold sensation at the base of his neck, and then he fell to the ground, writhing in agony, just like the swordsman Engis. It was Viserys. He didn't care about Caperson's miserable state but instead stuffed the coins from the secret compartment into a pocket he had prepared in advance. 200 or 300 gold coins and hundreds of silver moons were enough to support the siblings for several years. As for the contracts and other documents, Viserys, of course, did not take them. Suddenly, Viserys found a black dagger. The message, as if projected directly onto his retina, made him pause. The so-called Dragonbone dagger is a dagger made from dragonbone, light, sharp, and tough. The Dragonbone dagger and the Dragonbone bow are both weapons that warriors are eager to obtain. He inserted the dagger at the back of his waist, then loaded the coins. The coins were not heavy, weighing only 3 or 4 caddies. He hung them on his body, lit the candles, set the curtains on fire, and then turned around to find the poor girl in the room. The girl was about 14 years old. When Viserys had just entered, Carmen had been about to do something to her. The girl seemed resigned to her fate, lying motionless on the bed like a pale, dead fish. Viserys slit Carmen's throat, comforted the girl, and then returned to kill Caperson. He chose to save her because he was wearing a mask. Plus, he could tell that the girl was being forced, so at least she wouldn't say anything if anyone asked. When he tried to help her up, she struggled to resist. Kill me, the girl said weakly, her voice like a wounded oriole, sad and melodious. Viserys was silent for a moment. He had overheard Caperson and Carmen's conversation. There seemed to be someone else behind this, someone called Old Pigskin. He could save her now, but not forever. And he was in danger himself. You can give me the candle, please. He knew the girl wanted to make it look like she had started the fire. What's your name? He asked. Sisai, she replied bitterly. Okay, Sisai. Viserys took her head in his arms and gently twisted it, ending her suffering. Bannergar lived in a wealthy neighborhood where the houses were spaced out. When Viserys left, his house was like a huge lampshade in the darkness, the orange glow of the fire faintly visible. Soon, the flames roared like a giant python, consuming the entire house. The fire burned for nearly 3 hours before it was discovered. By that time, Viserys had already returned to his courtyard. Dany was holding a crossbow, her eyes wide with fear as she kept watch over the tied-up intruders. When she saw a figure at the door, she quickly aimed the crossbow. Realizing it was her brother, she relaxed. She was only 8 years old and felt exhausted after the tension. As soon as she stood up, she nearly fell. Fortunately, Viserys was quick and caught her. "How is it? Have they woken up yet?" he asked. Dany shook her head. No, they didn't get up. Seeing his little sister so tired made Viserys feel a pang of sadness. He carried her to bed and tucked her in. "Dany, I didn't go anywhere tonight. Do you remember?" he said gently. Dany looked confused but nodded, trusting her brother. "Repeat it," Viserys insisted. "Brother, you didn't go anywhere. You were with me the whole time." Chapter 10, The Fierce Fish-Eater. It was in the early morning hours that Bannergar and the others finally regained consciousness under the effects of the paralyzing toxin. This toxin wasn't an anesthetic, it was truly toxic. To verify its strength, Viserys had even personally caught a mouse to test it. As Bannergar came to his senses, he felt as if the earth beneath him was spinning. His internal organs were in complete turmoil, and the taste in his mouth was both fishy and bitter, making him feel nauseous and uncomfortable. Crack! 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 Suddenly, he heard the sound of a knife being sharpened. He opened his eyes and saw a silver-haired youth holding a sword and a whetstone, polishing the blade with great force. Sparks flew from the blade as he worked. Bannergar couldn't shake the feeling that the young man before him was not merely the descendant of a fallen kingdom, as the rumors suggested. Instead, he seemed like a demon with blood-sucking fangs, always ready to pounce. In fact, Bannergar's instincts were correct. After nearly 10 years of military service, Viserys had seen plenty of blood. And a lot of it. "Oh, Lord of the Fierce Fish, you're awake," Viserys said with a playful tone. Bannergar, recalling the scene of Viserys killing his men last night, decided to tread carefully. "Dangler, my creditor, ordered me to do it. I can give you some money or pay your debt for you," Bannergar said cautiously. He thought it best not to engage in empty talk with the young man in front of him and to offer something tangible instead. Viserys did not respond immediately. Instead, he pointed at Engiz's corpse and said, "This guy is wanted in Bravos. I don't know what you're doing with him." Bannergar's mouth twitched. He guessed that Viserys was asking for a price. "Then name your price," Bannergar tried to put on a smile. "I want to know who is trying to kill me and my sister," Viserys said, putting down the whetstone and walking up to him. After 2 attacks in a row, he needed to know the truth. Although Dangler was Bannergar's creditor, Viserys believed he wasn't the one targeting the siblings. From the conversation between Bannergar's 2 sons last night, Viserys suspected there was someone else behind it. Even if he hadn't overheard the conversation, he could have guessed as much. After all, Viserys had seen the script. He remembered that the merchant Illyrio, who had arranged a marriage between Dany and the Horse Lord in the original story, had once said he wanted to marry Dany. But he also thought Dany was too cowardly, so he gave up on the idea. However, in Viserys' opinion, this was nonsense. How could a businessman who valued profit above all else be so unobjective? The only reason was that he thought he couldn't keep Dany. It would only cause trouble. Illyrio was someone who could negotiate with the Horse Lord, and he was a cut above Dangler. If Illyrio wouldn't dare to think about Dany, Dangler certainly wouldn't. So Viserys wanted to get some clues from Bannergar. Of course, Bannergar denied knowing anything. Although he didn't know the identity of the big shot, he knew that he definitely couldn't afford to provoke him. "You really don't know?" Viserys asked, his voice laced with menace. "I really don't know," Bannergar insisted, gritting his teeth. He decided to stand firm. After all, could this young man really kill him? Viserys had already killed 2 people. If he killed too many, the consequences would be severe. Viserys also had a young sister to think about, so he would likely choose to stop before things got out of hand. But Viserys simply snickered and pulled out a hemp rope from somewhere. He had tied a long nail to the end of it. Holding it against the throat of one of Bannergar's henchmen, he asked again, "You really don't know?" Bannergar felt his tongue go numb, still refusing to believe that Viserys would kill them all. "I really don't know." Viserys looked down at the henchman, who was already shaking like a leaf. Without hesitation, he drove the long iron spike into the man's jaw. With a scream, the spike passed through his jaw and out of his mouth, making the man writhe in agony like a fish on a hook. "Still don't know?" Viserys asked, his voice rising. Bannergar felt the stiffness spreading to his neck, but he still managed to shake his head. Viserys repeated the process, driving the nail through the jaw of another henchman. Still not remembering. Bannergar felt a chill run down his spine. His earlier bravado was gone, and his molars, usually a sign of his menace, now chattered with fear. Viserys grabbed his throat and drove the iron spike through his mouth, eliciting screams of pain that echoed through the neighborhood. Viserys was frustrated. Bannergar's refusal to divulge any information suggested that whoever was targeting the siblings was powerful. But the fact that this person was hiding meant their reputation was important. If Viserys and his sister were to survive in Braavos, they needed to show they were not to be trifled with. Viserys strung up the bodies of the living and the dead alike. He noticed someone peeking out from behind a door. It was a water vendor who lived nearby, usually selling sweet water from the long canal with a donkey in tow. "Hey, you, come here," Viserys called out. The skinny water vendor was taken aback and pointed at himself in disbelief. "Yes, you. Your donkey. I'd like to borrow it." Okay, the vendor replied, quickly leading his donkey over. Viserys took a silver moon coin from his pocket and tossed it to the vendor. "I'll pay you back tomorrow." "Okay, you go ahead," the vendor stammered, not daring to refuse. A silver moon coin was worth a week's food for a family of 5, and also represented 2 days' income for him. Viserys tied the wailing Bannergar to the back of the donkey, preparing to take them to the mayor. Braavos was too large for the Sea Lord, the supreme ruler, to manage every corner of the city personally. When Viserys had first arrived in Braavos, the Sea Lord had seen some potential in him, meeting with him and even acting as his best man. But now, Viserys had lost much of that favor. Perhaps there was still a bit of affection left, but it wasn't something to be relied on now. "Dany, let's go out for a while and come back in the afternoon to sleep," Viserys called to his sister. "Oh, okay," Dany replied, getting up from the bed a little dizzy. She followed Viserys to the mayor's office. "Oh my God. What am I seeing? Those people, is he the beggar?" A passerby was about to utter the Beggar King, but quickly swallowed the words. There was no mistaking the terror that Viserys inspired at that moment. His clothes were soaked in blood, and he was dragging several people behind him like fish on a line. "That's Bannergar. Oh my God. It's Bannergar." The street was bustling with early morning activity as people began their day. It didn't take long for someone to recognize Bannergar, a man with a terrible reputation, now in such a pitiful state. And the young man leading the donkey was clearly responsible for it. Viserys, leading the donkey, exuded a chilling aura. Dany, sitting on the donkey's back, blushed at the attention they were receiving. Behind the donkey trailed Bannergar and his men. Their mouths were pierced by hemp ropes, and they had to support the dead bodies of Engis and another henchman, all strung up like fish by Viserys. Chapter 11. The fierce fish mansion collapsed. "My lord, that's what happened. They broke into my house in the middle of the night and tried to kidnap my sister. Braavos has strict laws against human trafficking. Not only that, they were mixed up with the most heinous of wanted criminals." Viserys recounted the events of the previous night to the mayor, carefully omitting any details that might cast him in a negative light. He had imagined the court in Braavos to be like those depicted in historical dramas, the Lord of Justice presiding in the main hall, a crowd of onlookers gathered outside, and a magistrate clapping a gavel to the applause of the people. However, the reality was quite different. He found himself in a relatively spacious hall with fireplaces around the room and stone slabs covering the floor. There were no ordinary people outside, but a number of important-looking individuals who had come to watch the proceedings. These observers, dressed in black or white, scrutinized the siblings. Despite the serious atmosphere, their good looks worked in their favor. Some of the noble ladies seemed to have already passed judgment, charmed by timid Dany's lovable demeanor and thin but determined Viserys. Viserys noted the unusual fashion. In Braavos, black and white clothing was worn by the rich and nobles to flaunt their status, which was the exact opposite of other places. The effect was somewhat gloomy, reminding him of grim messengers of death. Despite this, Viserys remained respectful and courteous, trying to win the sympathy of the Lord Mayor. The mayor of Bitterwell, Franz, was a middle-aged man in his late 40s. He had been in a foul mood since early morning when he heard about the murder in town. It was his youngest daughter's 14th birthday, and the news had spoiled his day. He was surprised to hear that the so-called Beggar King was involved in the incident, but it was only a fleeting surprise. After all, Braavos was a haven for refugees, and the siblings, despite their different identities, were no exception. Franz's mood improved slightly when he learned that one of the dead was a wanted criminal, seeing it as an achievement of his own. However, he still had some doubts about the case and needed to ask a few questions to clarify. "You mean to tell me you defeated 6 of them single-handedly?" With this, Mayor Franz long held up the broken crossbow, skepticism evident in his voice. "Yes, I soaked the wooden arrow in the intestines of a black belly fish, so." Viserys began to explain. "Intestines?" Franz interrupted, confused. It was clear the mayor wasn't familiar with handling such things himself. A maester-like figure beside Franz leaned in and whispered an explanation. Franz nodded, his doubts easing. Bannergar was notorious, and Engis was a fugitive. From a practical standpoint, Franz favored the siblings. Besides, Viserys' respectful and sincere demeanor made a positive impression. Franz nodded and commanded, "Bring Bannergar and the others here." A few guards dragged Bannergar and his men forward, having cut the ropes binding them for the Lord Mayor's questioning. Franz looked at them with clear disdain. "You broke into their home at night and were found with a wanted criminal. What were you up to?" Franz demanded. Bannergar, with a cut on his lip, struggled to speak clearly but knew he had to respond. "I don't know this Engis. I don't know him," he lied, his eyes unflinching. Viserys watched in amazement at Bannergar's blatant deceit. "He owes us money, and we came to collect. Instead, he attacked us and killed our men. Lord Mayor, please arrest him." Bannergar continued, attempting to flip the situation. "What the hell? He's turning the tables on us." Viserys thought, incredulous. "Oh. Is that so?" Franz turned to Viserys, his initial sympathy waning. The Braavosi despised bad debtors, and failing to pay debts carried a moral stigma. Viserys quickly responded, "My lord, it is true I owe them money, but I have been diligently looking for work. I've secured a good job and will repay my debt in 2 months at most. And," he pointed to Engis's body, "this wanted criminal is worth a few gold coins as well. I'll be able to pay back soon. Lord Mayor, I owe the money, but they tried to take my sister, my only family. What could I do against such debt collectors?" Viserys pleaded. Franz frowned, turning back to Bannergar. "You tried to kidnap a child?" Bannergar hesitated, knowing the gravity of the accusation. Braavos had a particular hatred for traffickers, even more so than for debtors. "He's lying. We never said anything like that." "No, we didn't." Before Viserys could finish his retort, Dany suddenly collapsed next to him. The ladies who had come to watch the proceedings gasped in horror. "Dany." Viserys quickly picked her up, feeling her forehead. She had a fever. He remembered that children had weaker constitutions and were prone to illness, often due to exhaustion or emotional distress. Dany clearly belonged to the latter. "Dany. What's wrong with you, Dany?" Viserys held her tightly, his voice full of anxiety. Though they had only been together for half a month, they had already faced life and death together. Despite his harsh treatment of her, the bond between siblings couldn't be denied. They had been together for 7 or 8 years, and those feelings had transferred to Viserys. Seeing Dany faint made him panic. In the Middle Ages, fevers could be fatal. "Dany. Dany, don't scare me," he cried, letting his emotions flow freely. A tear rolled down his cheek. "You bastards. If anything happens to my sister, I'll kill you all." Viserys' eyes were bloodshot, his voice like the roar of a furious dragon. The nobles who had come to watch were now firmly on the side of the siblings. Some were parents themselves and knew how easily children could fall ill from fright. It was now clear whether Bannergar and his men had malicious intent. Their long history of bad behavior didn't help their case. "My lord, this scum should be locked up." "Yes. Lock him up." The crowd's outcry swayed Franz's judgment. Bannergar realized the situation was turning against him and tried to speak up, but another announcement came from outside. "Lord Mayor, there was a fire at the Fierce Fish Mansion on Blue Water Street last night, killing 3 people. "The Fierce Fish Mansion, isn't that my house?" Bannergar asked, panic rising in his voice. Who was burned to death?" The men seemed to know Bannergar and replied with a strange look, "The identities haven't been confirmed yet, but it appears to be your 2 sons and a prostitute." Chapter 12, Even those who don't burn have fevers. With less than half a year remaining until the 10-day festival in Braavos, Mayor Franz was under significant pressure to close the case quickly. As a result, he didn't delve deeply into the investigation. The wanted criminal, Engis, was killed, and the reward was given to Viserys. Bannergar was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor for attempting to traffic humans. He would be sent to Braavos to plant windbreaks. As for the incident on Blue Water Street, it was concluded that the humiliated prostitute had set fire to the house, with the lampstand found in her hand serving as evidence. This incident was also reported to the Sea Lord of Braavos, who naturally sided with Viserys. It wasn't because Viserys had any particular influence but because the Sea Lord needed to protect Braavos' image. The death of a fleeing prince within Braavos' borders would tarnish its reputation. It was acceptable for Viserys to be killed by a foreigner, but not by a local. With the Sea Lord's approval, the Fierce Fish Company ceased to exist. This incident drew the Sea Lord's attention, causing Dangler, or whoever was behind him, to temporarily halt any plots against Dany. This allowed the siblings to finally breathe a sigh of relief. The destruction of the Fierce Fish Company quickly spread throughout Bitterwell town. Of course, hanging people like fish. That Beggar King. I mean, that Viserys, is definitely no ordinary person, exclaimed a fisherman, gesticulating excitedly and holding up a fish to demonstrate. So the Fierce Fish Company is finished? Asked a woman with a charming smile. Of course. Bannergar was thrown into the windbreak forest to plant trees. His 2 sons were also killed in the fire. That's not bad, she replied. Yes, others agreed. Naturally, this news reached Hellbow's ears. Is it really possible that a 14-year-old prostitute could have done all that at Blue Water Street? Hellbow mused, dipping his hand in water and scribbling on the table as if trying to calculate the distance from Viserys' residence to the Fierce Fish Mansion. No matter how he calculated it, he couldn't believe that Viserys wasn't involved. His intuition told him otherwise. But with the mayor having closed the case, there was no point in pursuing it further. In fact, he and Bannergar had been competitors, with Bannergar often getting the upper hand. The destruction of the Fierce Fish Company was a win-win for both Hellbow and Viserys. Hellbow could now take over Bannergar's market share, and he planned to approach Viserys to formally invite him to join his team. With such a ruthless man on his side, Hellbow was confident they could grow bigger and stronger and achieve new glories together. But Viserys didn't care about the outside world at the moment. His entire focus was on bringing down Dany's fever. He bought some strong alcohol to wipe her body, followed by sweet water to wash her. With no serious fever-reducing medicine available, he relied on physical means to reduce the fever. He soaked all the gold and silver coins he had obtained from Bannergar in cold water, using the thermal conductivity of the metal to help cool her down. He placed the chilled coins on Dany's neck, armpits, and thighs, changing them as soon as they warmed up. This made Viserys wonder if the fever had anything to do with being a Targaryen and their supposed immunity to fire. In the midst of this, Hellbow came by, but he didn't enter the room, sensing it wasn't the right time. However, he soon sent someone with medicinal herbs, water, and food, which Viserys gratefully accepted. Neighbors also came to visit, leaving behind a pile of daily necessities. They saw the opportunity to improve their relationship with the murderer in the neighborhood, displaying the shrewdness typical of Braavosi people. Consequently, Viserys' status quickly changed from refugee to that gentleman. Thanks to Viserys' efforts, Dany woke up the next morning. Feeling suddenly very uncomfortable, she reached out and grabbed something, finding herself holding a handful of gold coins. Little Dany thought she was hallucinating and clutched the coins for a long time. At that moment, Viserys appeared, placing his hand on her forehead. Seeing that the fever had subsided, he gently asked, "Feeling better?" Dany nodded, and her stomach made a gurgling sound. Viserys smiled, knowing that hunger was a good sign. "What would you like to eat? Braised fish, steamed fish, fish with pickled vegetables, or steamed eggs?" Dany pursed her cherry-red lips and said, a little embarrassed, "Steamed eggs." "Okay, wait," Viserys replied. Dany lay on the bed, watching Viserys' busy figure, and felt like the happiest person in the world, even happier than when she was at the house with the red door. Soon after, the golden steamed egg was brought to Dany's lips. After she finished eating, she quickly fell asleep again. Seeing her little face regain its color, Viserys knew that the little girl was going to be fine. Viserys himself had a little something to eat and took the opportunity to open the panel. Everything seemed normal until he saw the assignable points and realized something was off. The assignable points had actually become 1.15. According to his previous experience, assignable points should only increase by 0.1 every day. But today, it had increased significantly more. This was perplexing. Viserys tried to recall the events of the previous night. There were 5 people who had died because of him. Could it be that the extra points were provided by their deaths? Was this some sort of murderous system? Wait. Could it be the Dragonbone dagger? Viserys took out the dragonbone dagger and touched the dark blade. For a moment, he couldn't make sense of it. Tisk, why can't it be like other systems, with a message that says, detected dots, do you want to absorb them? Okay, don't worry, you have a system, so what are you complaining about? Just wait and see, he thought to himself. In his heart, Viserys hoped it was the latter. But if the system really required him to become stronger through killing, then he would find a way to join the sellswords as soon as possible. He estimated that after this incident, the lives of him and his sister should be able to calm down for a while. He planned to use this time to become stronger as soon as possible. As for leaving Braavos, Viserys had considered it but decided to stay. Even though there was someone lurking in the shadows with designs on Dany, the law in Braavos still had a considerable deterrent effect. Merchants valued stability, and the people of Braavos respected the law. At the very least, there was no open human trafficking, which was a very favorable situation for the descendants of a fallen dynasty like the two siblings. Viserys also had some ideas for making money that could only be realized in Braavos. He planned to join a sellsword company once he had improved his skills a bit more, and then move further away from Westeros to reduce the chances of being assassinated. Soon, the exploits of Viserys spread to those who had a vested interest in his activities. One such individual was the Pentoshi merchant Illyrio Mopatis, who had previously been in contact with the Targaryen siblings. Illyrio, the same man who had once considered marrying Dany to secure an alliance, took a renewed interest in Viserys after hearing about his recent actions. Viserys' decisive and ruthless handling of the Fierce Fish Company had shown Illyrio a different side of the boy. This display of cunning and strength suggested that Viserys might have more potential than he had initially thought. Illyrio decided it was time to meet the young man again and reassess his value and potential role in the broader scheme of restoring the Targaryen dynasty to the Iron Throne. Illyrio had been preoccupied with his own business ventures but had always kept an eye out for promising allies. He was also considering potential supporters for Viserys in his quest to reclaim the Iron Throne. The Horse Lords of the Dothraki had already caught his attention as a possible avenue of support, but this plan needed careful and strategic planning. Chapter 13, Master Swordsmanship. In the next 2 months, Helbo took over most of Banergar's business, rapidly expanding his influence. When it came time to collect debts, all he needed to do was bring Viserys along, and the debtors would quickly comply. Helbo was considerate enough to avoid involving Viserys in actions that would harass widows and orphans, knowing that they usually had no money to pay. Despite this limitation, Viserys amassed nearly 500 gold dragons in less than 2 months. With this fortune, he could comfortably raise Dany to adulthood. Additionally, Viserys integrated the black dragonbone dagger into his fighting techniques. This dagger, sharp and tough like night claws, was perfect for assassination. During one of their debt-collecting missions, they acquired half of a fossilized dragon egg from a bankrupt merchant, which increased Viserys' assignable points by 3 that day. Although he wanted to buy an entire dragon egg, the exorbitant price, worth thousands of gold dragons, deterred him. However, this encounter pointed him towards a new path for gaining strength quickly, collecting dragon eggs or dragonbone products. Both required significant amounts of money. According to the original plot, a significant event would occur in a few years, the Bleeding Star. A red comet would pass by, heralding the return of magic. This event would allow Dany to hatch dragon eggs. Therefore, whether for the sake of hatching a dragon or for Viserys to become stronger quickly, they needed to amass wealth and collect dragon eggs. Meanwhile, the siblings' lives improved dramatically. They moved back to a wealthy district and hired 2 maids. Although it was still far from the house with the red door they once lived in, they now had daily access to sweet water and could take proper baths instead of sharing a wash basin. The timid little girl who had first arrived in Braavos began to change. Under her brother's care, Dany became more cheerful. The maid's attention restored some of her former elegance, and with Viserys teaching her swordsmanship, she became more energetic than ever. The scars on her body had long since healed, proving that love can grow new flesh and blood. One day, Viserys was practicing swordsmanship with Dany on the lawn of their new house in the wealthy district. The spacious yard provided ample room for training. Dany wore a blue training outfit and white whale-skin boots, mirroring Viserys' every move. Viserys noticed that his system was quite scientific. His proficiency increased more quickly when teaching or sparring with others. He chose the former, and his swordsmanship was now just a step away from reaching expert level. Dany, pay attention to me. When you swing your sword, it's not just the power of your arms but the power of your torso. Your shoulders are the bridge. Suddenly, the bright blade of Viserys' sword traced a crescent moon, leaving a deep mark on the target. For a moment, he felt as if he could hear the sound of the sword reverberating in his ears. It was the memory of the original Viserys in the Red Keep, where the sound of the Kingsguard practicing their swordsmanship played like a distant echo. Among them were his older brother Rhaegar, Arthur Dayne, the Knight of the Dawn, the fearless Barry Stan, and the Kingslayer Jaime Lannister. These fragments of memory seemed to come to life, replaying in his mind and integrating into his muscles. At this moment, the long sword in his hand truly became an extension of his body. Swordsmanship. Master Viserys didn't need to open the panel to confirm that his sword skills had reached a new level. Though only 15 years old, he had achieved master-level swordsmanship. If someone broke into his house again, he could easily handle them, even someone like Aenys. Dany saw a scene reminiscent of when Viserys first arrived. He seemed to enter a state of ecstasy, wielding his sword with such grace and precision that it was almost like watching a dance, but better. The rhythm and charm in his movements were mesmerizing. After about 10 minutes, Viserys stopped, looking at Dany with a bit of embarrassment. "Oh, let's continue," he said. Just as the siblings resumed their practice, Helbo arrived with a gift. Behind him was a young man with a scholarly air, brown curly hair, and a kind smile, said to be an accountant. Helbo would have preferred to bring bald Regis, but knowing Dany was a little scared of him, he chose the accountant instead. "Lord Viserys," Helbo greeted respectfully. At Viserys' request, he no longer called him Prince. Considering Viserys' current status as a king without a kingdom, he preferred to avoid such grand titles. "Helbo," Viserys acknowledged with a nod, while Dany curtsied slightly and responded politely, "Good day, Helbo." "My lady Dany, you are becoming more and more beautiful," Helbo complimented, genuinely impressed. With proper nutrition and love, Dany was blossoming into a lovely and cheerful young lady. Every time Helbo visited, he couldn't help but admire her, but under Viserys' watchful eye, he restrained himself. From the gift box, Helbo produced a dagger with a silver handle adorned with precious stones. This was his gift for Dany. Her violet eyes lit up with delight. "Thank you," she said, her appreciation clear. "Haha, I'm glad you like it," Helbo responded warmly, handing the dagger to Dany with care. "More work?" Viserys asked, sticking his sword into the ground, ready to discuss business. Helbo placed the other gifts on a side table and nodded. "Yes, this is a big deal, but it's not debt collection." Viserys turned to the maid. "Jill, please take Dany to play." "Yes, Lord," Jill responded, leading Dany away. Dany, understanding that her brother was about to discuss business, obediently followed. "Go ahead, what is it?" Viserys asked once they were alone, sitting down at the table. "In the town, there is a workshop that specializes in making whale oil candles. They are recruiting guards," Helbo explained. Viserys, about to take a drink, paused, puzzled. "You found me a guard job." No, Helbo hastily clarified. "If it were just a guard, I wouldn't have come to you. There's been trouble at the factory recently. Someone has been causing disturbances at the door. The owner needs guards to ensure normal production for a month and will pay a generous reward afterward." Viserys considered this, recalling historical instances of capitalists hiring private armies. In this medieval-like setting, it wasn't surprising that a factory owner might need thugs for protection. However, he wanted to ensure the workshop's financial stability to avoid working for nothing. "You can rest assured," Helbo assured him, "this workshop is backed by the shares of Lady Moonshadow Phalia. She will not default on our payment." "Moonshadow Phalia?" Viserys echoed, intrigued. Chapter 14, The Courtesan of Braavos. When Viserys first arrived in Braavos, he was focused on restoring his kingdom and searching for potential allies. Thus, when Helbo mentioned Phalia, Viserys immediately knew who she was. Phalia, known as Moonshadow, was a prominent figure among the elite courtesans of Braavos. Braavos, with its bustling business community, hosted numerous gatherings, creating a niche for social butterflies who bridged the gap between wealthy businessmen and influential individuals. These high-end courtesans facilitated deals and alliances with their charm and intelligence, sometimes even establishing their own businesses. Reputation was paramount among these courtesans, and they employed protective swordsmen to maintain their honor. These bodyguards came from two main sources: suitors who were deeply in love with the courtesans, or hired swordsmen. The latter were necessary when suitors lacked the skills to defend their honor. These protective swordsmen were similar to the loyal knights who followed noblewomen in Westeros, such as Jorah Mormont or the leader of the Second Sons. High-end courtesans, like Phalia, were distinct from their lower-end counterparts who traded their bodies for financial gain and could be compared to medieval prostitutes. Phalia, however, was a respected figure with numerous wealthy merchants vying for her favor. She was also a favorite in the 10-day festival's beauty contest, reflecting her high status and wealth. After Helbo's introduction, Viserys immediately accepted the job. He needed to save money to buy dragon eggs and strengthen himself as quickly as possible. Recently, he had a dream of a man in black crossing the sea, which he interpreted as a sign that Robert Baratheon had sent another assassin. In that case, I'll take you there tomorrow. Helbo offered. Of course, no problem. Viserys agreed readily, surprising Helbo. Helbo was uncertain about Viserys taking on the bodyguard job. He knew it wasn't glamorous work, much like debt collection, but he remembered how Viserys had been fixated on restoring his kingdom. The young man's reputation for spending money to entertain himself was well known, making him a laughingstock in Bravos and the Free Cities. Helbo doubted Viserys would be comfortable working as a guard, given the significant difference in prestige. To his surprise, Viserys agreed readily. Is he trying to save up to buy an army? Helbo muttered to himself. It didn't seem to be a very good idea to him. Even after climbing into the carriage, he couldn't help but look back, puzzled by Viserys' eagerness. Helbo had recently expanded his operations, partly due to acquiring Bannergar's shares. His earnings had increased, and he now managed nearly 50 men, none of whom matched Viserys' prowess. He had moved into a better house with water piped in directly from the Long Canal, a status symbol in Bravos. Viserys had considered the same for his home but abandoned the idea upon learning the pipes were made of lead. He tried to persuade Helbo of the health risks, but Helbo saw it as a mark of status and dismissed his concerns. As the saying goes, it's hard to convince a stubborn mind. Viserys had to respect Helbo's decision, even if he disagreed with it. The next day, Helbo arrived in his carriage to pick up Viserys. Anticipating potential conflicts, Viserys was prepared. He wore a suit of leather armor, with a dagger and crossbow at his waist and a pair of two-handed swords on his back. His constitution was nearing the level of a healthy adult, and he wondered if reaching the next level would bring a similar surge of strength as his skill advancements. If Viserys had once resembled a tall but bare sapling upon his first arrival in Bravos, he now stood like a spear. His body was straight, and after cutting his hair short, his facial features appeared less sinister and more handsome. "Brother, when will you be back?" Dany asked, already reluctant to let him go before he had even left the house. "Maybe it will be a few days. You should study more, practice more, eat fewer snacks, sleep more, and don't run around," Viserys replied. "Oh." Dany nodded, having begged him to take her along the previous night, but he had refused. To ensure her safety, Viserys instructed Helbo to leave someone behind to keep watch and maintain constant contact. He could return home immediately if anything happened. Soon, the two of them arrived at a small harbor. "Take the boat. It's only 3 iron coins to Greenwater Town." 1, 2, 1, 2. Fresh onions. Just arrived from the mainland. "Hey, Lord." As a city of 1,000 islands, Bravos had a dense network of waterways. Shipping was an integral part of life. Boatmen touted their services, bare-chested porters hauled goods, and vendors hawked their wares. Even prostitutes flirted with potential customers. Viserys and Helbo walked through the bustling crowd and boarded a boat at a small harbor. Bald Regis was giving a speech to a group of newcomers when he saw Viserys and Helbo arrive. He quickly put on a somewhat cheap smile. "Lord Viserys, Lord Helbo." When Viserys first joined Helbo, Regis had been a bit upset. He thought Viserys had ambushed him and didn't believe that he had killed the fierce fish Bannergar. Viserys had volunteered to accept his challenge at any time. Initially, Regis held his own due to his weight, but as time passed, Viserys easily knocked him down with just one hand. Afterwards, Viserys taught him a few tricks, earning Regis's respect and admiration even more than his boss, Helbo. Viserys glanced down and saw about 30 people in total, with 4 boats between them. He and Helbo sat in one boat while the others filled the remaining boats. Although it was a bit crowded, no one complained. Stretching out their legs was a privilege reserved for the big boss. Among the group, Viserys stood out. Not only was he tall and well-proportioned, but his silver hair was also eye-catching. Along the way, young wives and girls couldn't help but take a second look. Soon, someone recognized his identity. "Don't stare, silly girl. He's the fierce fish eater." The fierce fish eater? Those who recognized Viserys whispered about his deeds to those around them. Some timid girls covered their mouths, looking at him in disbelief. A young man who appeared gentle and scholarly could actually be so ruthless. However, once they left the town of Bitterwell, Viserys' reputation was not as well known. By noon, Helbo and his party arrived in the town of White Sails, where the candle workshop was located. On the shore, a middle-aged man with a bald head and gray hair waited with a few people. Helbo saw them first and stood up to greet them. The middle-aged man slightly bowed with his hands on his chest, then personally came forward to greet him. Chapter 15, Professional Meeting. The owner of the workshop was a bald, middle-aged man named Morel. His face bore 2 deep wrinkles between his eyebrows, as if he carried a lot of pent-up frustration. Standing beside Morel was his son, Rabbi, who, influenced by his father's demeanor, seemed to lack vigor. Even managing a smile was a struggle for him. "Helbo, why did you bring such a young man here?" "He looks younger than me," Rabbi muttered, casting a doubtful glance at Viserys. His skepticism was understandable. Viserys looked far too young, especially with his short hair making him appear more like a half-grown boy than a seasoned leader. Although he had an appealing look, he resembled more a squire than a knight ready for command. Morel shared his son's reservations. In his view, the shiny-headed Regis seemed more reassuring than Viserys. Seeing Viserys in the center of the group from a distance made Morel and his son uneasy. However, changing their minds now would affect their reputation as businessmen and upset Helbo, so they had to proceed as planned. "Okay, don't say that again," Morel pressed, warning his son. He straightened his clothes, cleared his throat, and walked towards Viserys and the others. "Lord Helbo, you've finally arrived. I can finally relax now." Morel greeted Helbo, extending his hand. Helbo, however, did not immediately take Morel's hand. Instead, he looked around at the workshop. "Your workshop is really huge. It would take 2 hours to walk around it," he remarked, pulling himself together and projecting the image Morel wanted to see. A traditional merchant like Morel needed to appear honest and trustworthy, while a security provider like Helbo needed to project strength and reassurance. Morel calmly withdrew his hand, then addressed the people behind him. "Oh, no, no. But with these fine men you brought, I have nothing to worry about." Helbo smiled and introduced the group. "This is Lord Viserys, and this is Regis. They will be in charge of the workshop's security." Regis puffed out his chest, looking very different from before. The master of the Bravo's workshop seemed to favor him. However, Morel did not show his preference openly. Instead, he praised both Viserys and Regis. Rabbi, standing behind his father, also remained quiet, feeling that the name Viserys was familiar but not knowing where he had heard it before. "I have prepared some fine wine for you. Please follow me," Morel invited. "Yes, let's go." Helbo responded enthusiastically, walking at the front with Morel by his side. Viserys observed the workshop from a distance, noting its considerable size. It was not an exaggeration to call it a factory. Along the road, carts pulled large blocks of snow-white whale oil. The ground felt greasy under his feet, as if he were in the kitchen of a busy restaurant, each step making his feet feel sticky. White smoke billowed from various parts of the workshop, where wicks were drying, and both male and female workers, heads down, bustled about. They all wore oil-slick leather aprons, obscuring their features. When Morel passed by, the workers bowed, and Morel nodded in acknowledgement. For fire prevention, the factory had a lot of water. Viserys noticed a watchtower in the workshop, though its location was a bit off. He thought if it were moved a little further east and had 2 archers stationed there, the entire workshop could be controlled. After walking for about 20 minutes, they arrived at the back of the factory, where the environment was noticeably better. Most of Helbo's men were taken to a more spacious area by Rabbi, while only Helbo, Viserys, and Regis joined Morel for dinner. "This is wine from the arbor. Try it," Morel said, pouring a pale golden liquid for the 3 of them. "The arbor in Westeros, vassal of Highgarden. Their fleet is powerful, and the grandmother of the little Rose is from House Redwine in the arbor," Viserys noticed, sipping the wine as information about arbor flashed through his mind. After 3 rounds of wine, Morel began to reveal his worries. In half a year, the 10-day festival would be held in Bravos, an event occurring every 3 years. During the festival, a large number of candles would be consumed, and the festival's costs in terms of supplies were immense. Behind each supply was an unimaginable profit. The cost of candles alone exceeded 30,000 gold dragons, not to mention alcohol, clothing, and other goods. "I have to produce enough candles to secure a sufficient market share. Otherwise, after the celebration is over, this workshop might not survive," Morel said bitterly, pouring himself another glass of wine. Helbo, standing next to Morel, slammed his glass down on the table and shouted, "Don't worry, we'll make sure your production runs smoothly." "Thank you. I truly appreciate it." Morel responded excitedly, quickly toasting the group. At this point, Viserys spoke up, "Do you have a floor plan of the workshop that I could take a look at?" "No problem." "When do you need it?" Morel asked. "As soon as possible," Viserys replied. Though Morel was in his 50s and Viserys was barely 15, he agreed to Viserys' request out of respect for Helbo. However, as Rabbi handed the floor plan to his father, he shared some disturbing news. He is Viserys Targaryen, the Beggar King from Westeros. Rabbi exclaimed, looking at Viserys with resentment. Morel's face soured at the revelation. While the common people of Braavos might not recognize the name, the upper and middle classes of Braavos, and indeed the entire free cities, knew of him. He was infamous for selling his mother's crown and hosting a banquet for a group of sellsword leaders, only to be tricked. Can such a person really protect my workshop? Morel wondered, his hopes, which had just been raised, collapsing by half.